This is the USA Emergency Broadcast Network, your source for reliable disaster preparedness information.
The views and opinions expressed on this program are not necessarily the views of this station, its management, sponsors, or other hosts. If you have any comments or suggestions about this program, please contact us at radio@usaebn.org. That's radio@usaebn.org.
Welcome to the Zeta Report here on USA Emergency Broadcasting Network. My name is Andre. I'm with USAEBN, and we are joined on Monday mornings with Nancy Leader from ZetaTalk.com. Nancy, are you there?
I am, and I'm all excited. I'm going to revisit the issue of the 3,600-year signature. We did this 3.5 years ago, but I want to go back and just remind people of how astonishing it is, because anyone who doubts that we have Nibiru swinging through every 3,600 years only has to look at the massive amount of evidence that this happens. But before I roll into it, let me give our standard disclaimer. In partnership with USAEBN, Zeta Talk and the Zeta Report will be discussing the challenges of living on a planet beset with change, rising seas, increasing earthquakes and volcanic activity, weather gone wild, and the worry of what to do in a worst-case scenario. We will also inject Zeta Talk prophecy on what is coming next and advice on readiness plans and safe locations. Whenever Zeta Talk is quoted, please remember that prophecy is not fact. It is opinion. It only becomes fact when it happens. The Zetas are remarkably accurate but have been wrong on occasion. Bear that in mind. For more information on this subject, visit ZetaTalk.com or the Zeta Report on YouTube. Ice ages. What causes ice ages? Why would a part of the globe just willy-nilly decide to freeze over for a period of time, especially when at the same time, at the same latitude, the climate is very temperate? Does the sun wink off only when over the ice cap? A passage of Nibiru causes a crustal shift such that different parts of the Earth's crust are placed at the magnetic North Pole or South Pole, thus getting less sunlight and, voila, freezing over. These catastrophic events have left their mark in the geology. Our best evidence that Nibiru exists and makes a passage every 3,600 years. At the start of the Zeta Talk saga, the Zetas were asked to sort out the mystery of wandering poles, the ice ages that descend on this or that part of the globe. The Zetas detailed the past placement of the North and South poles. In the opinion of the Zetas, 1,800 years ago, the North Pole was centered over North America and moved during that crustal shift to Scandinavia. It seems to agree, and I quote, "The maximum ice extent occurred approximately 25,000 to 2,100 years ago, pretty close to 18,000. Then, and end of the quote, then 14,4 years ago, stepping through in 3,600-year increments, in the opinion of the Zetas, there was a small crustal shift moving the North Pole from Scandinavia to the Barents Sea in the Arctic. The University of Toronto seems to agree, as they found that the sea level rose by 20 meters 14,000 years ago. Compare that to 14,000. And the University of Toronto says, near the end of the last ice age. And ScienceNordic.com also seems to agree, stating, and I quote, "People started settling in Scandinavia and calling it home soon after the region emerged out of the icy grip of the last ice age around 12,000 years ago." So they're comparing 12,000 years to 14,400. I mean, how would you determine that accurately? Then, per the Zetas, 10,800 years ago, the North Pole moved to the East Siberian Sea, pulling the far east of Russia northward. Per the Zetas, this was the pole shift that caused the Great Flood. The Great Flood was 3 pole shifts back, according to the Zetas. Per the Zetas, 7,200 years ago, the North Pole moved to Greenland, which still bears signs of all the ice that formed at that time. Why does Greenland have so much ice? Looking down on the Arctic, the current North Pole, this stands out as an oddity. The Greenland ice was formed during the 3,600-year period when Greenland was a geographic North Pole. After Antarctica, Greenland is the largest ice sheet. Quoting Cryptosphere, quick facts. Together, the Antarctica and Greenland ice sheets contain more than 99% of the freshwater ice on Earth. If the Greenland ice sheet melted, scientists estimate that the level would rise about 20 feet worldwide. If the Antarctic ice sheet melted, sea level would rise by about 200 feet. End of the quote. So that's a lot of ice on Greenland. I also tell people, if you're worried about where to get fresh drinking water after the pole shift, get a boat and go up to Greenland and chip away. It's an obvious source. Okay, the Sahara Desert. About 3,600 years ago, the North Pole moved back into the Arctic. There's lots of documentation on what happened just 3,600 years ago because it is recent and within mankind's memory, and mankind was writing, documents and things like that. Potsdam Institute found the climate of the Sahara changed abruptly 3,600 years ago, and this is well documented by many studies. Quoting Climate Arc, and I quote, "The great grasslands of North Africa turned into desert a few thousand years ago, 4,000 to 3,600 years ago, according to a paper published today by the journal Geophysical Research Letters." Germany's Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research analyzed computer models of climate over the past several thousand years. They concluded that the change in today's desert climate in the Sahara was triggered by changes in the Earth's orbit and the tilt of the Earth's axis. End of the quote. Then there's that big explosion in the Mediterranean. More evidence of cataclysmic changes, and we have that. The Greek volcano Thera, now known as Santorini, exploded during an estimated 1,628 BC before Christ. To count back, is that 3,600 years? Pretty close. Based on radiocarbon dating ranges from 1,500 to 1,645 years ago. The Thera eruption was 4 to 5 times greater than Krakatoa in 1883. What set it off? Quoting volcanodiscovery.com. An international team of scientists has found that the second largest volcanic eruption in human history, the massive Bronze Age eruption of Thera in Greece, was much larger and more widespread than previously believed. End of the quote. And here we go with the book of Exodus. It is well documented in both the book of Exodus in the Bible and the Egyptian Kolbrin and in the Egyptian Ipuwer papyrus that the Jewish Exodus occurred during a time of volcanic darkness. Since none of these written works have a certified timeline, we need to rely upon geological events such as the eruption of Thera. In other words, no certified timeline, but they go in and carbon date when Thera exploded, and that's probably better than anything man would put to print. Whatever happened, it was momentous. The Egyptian census stopped. Record keeping stopped. The slaves just walked away. Quoting Zeta talk. Slaves do not just walk away from their masters, and in particular a large group of slaves, old women and children among them, do not get miles away from their masters in a desert area where lookouts can see for miles. The Institute of Slavery is maintained by cruelty and punishment. The Jewish Exodus did not occur because this large group of people just decided to take a stroll one day, anticipating nothing worse than a whipping as the comeuppance should they be discovered. The Exodus occurred because their masters were devastated and distracted by problems so severe as to take their minds entirely off their slaves. Nothing in the normal course of Egyptian society would have created a situation where the Jews could have left en masse, or even a situation where they would all have the courage to leave. Chaos reigned. The Kolbrin connection this time to the eruption of Thera, and thus we have the 3,600-year signature because there is a dated episode. Quoting the Kolbrin, the darkness was not the clean blackout of night, but a thick darkness in which the breath of man was stopped in their throats. Men gasped in the hot cloud of vapor which enveloped all the land and snuffed out lamps and fires. Men lost their senses and became mad. The habitation of men collapsed upon those inside. The temples and palaces of the nobles were thrown down from their foundations. Men rose up against those in authority and fled from the cities to dwell in tents in the outlands. Egypt lacked great men to deal with the times. The slaves left. Their multitude moved in the gloom of a half-dawn under a mantle of fine swirling gray ash. Pharaoh abandoned his hopes and fled to the wilderness. Now, the Egyptians kept good records, and so did the Jews. They were actually forbidden by their religion to lie. So when they wrote these things down in the old Bible, and the Kolbrin wrote this stuff down, and it matches, and to a degree I'm not including today, but it's astonishing. They're both talking about the same events. It was not just the Mediterranean, not just Egypt. It was global. For scientific studies, the oceans of the world dropped 18 to 20 feet, some 3,000 to 4,000 years ago. There it is again, the 3,600-year signature. Quoting Velikovsky's book In Upheaval, Daly observed that in a great many places all around the world, there is a uniform emergence of the shoreline of 18 to 20 feet. Judging from the condition of beaches, terraces, and caves, this emergence seems to have been simultaneous on every shore. In Daly's opinion, the cause lies in the sinking of the level of all seas on the globe. Daly estimated the sudden drop of oceanic level to have occurred some 3,000 to 4,000 years ago. This guy ran all over the globe and measured, and it was like, where did the dust on the sand, on the shells, on the beach, where did the waves reach? And then, whoops, now they dropped, and then they never went that high again. And you can, date that dust, and he did. Madagascar, and if the earth was jerked about at that time, ripping the continents further apart, then there must have been tidal sloshing. There are several documented discoveries of water-washed caves filled with the bones of animals not normally found together. For instance, in an extinct cave in Madagascar. This includes now extinct giant lemurs, the size of gorillas. Quoting a Daily Mail article dated February 2015, the researchers have also discovered the bones from elephant birds, corned crocodiles, rodents, and hippos that roamed the island landscape thousands of years ago. However, most of the species found in the caves are now extinct, and scientists are baffled as to how so many diverse species ended up in one place, estimated to be between 3,000 and 4,000 years ago. The bones show hardly any sign of post-death damage, like the kind that comes from being eaten by predators. Now, end of the quote. Now, here's the thing. What would cause all that to be smashed into a cave? Because the tidal sloshing, the Zetas estimate 500 during the hour of the pole shift, 600 in places where there's tidal bore. And then that pushes, and then back and forth, and all the dead bodies get washed. They drowned, and they get washed into the cave. Same thing happened in the Mediterranean, too. Here we go. Velikovsky reports the same findings in the Mediterranean, evidence that waves mashed animals into caves, drowning them. These caves are now high above the water, quoting Velikovsky. Fissures in the rocks all over Western Europe are choked with bones of animals, some of extinct races, others, though, of the same age of races still surviving. The bones are mostly broken and splintered into innumerable sharp fragments and are evidently not those of animals devoured by beasts of prey. The Rock of Gibraltar is intersected by numerous caves filled with bones. The bones are broken and splintered. The remains of panther, lynx, kaffir cat, hyena, wolf bear, rhinoceros, horse, wild boar, red deer, fallow deer, ibex, ox, hare, rabbit have been found in these ossified fissures. On Corsica, Sardinia, and Sicily, the broken bones of animals choke the fissures in the rocks. The state of preservation of the bones indicates that the animals, all of them, perished in the same period of time. No hardened animal feces were found, indicating that the dead beasts had not lived in these hollows or fissures. No teeth marks of hyena or any other animal were found in the ossified mass. The bones of those animals are of all ages down to the fetus, nor do they show traces of weathering or exposure. The extremely fresh condition of the bones proved to be by the retention of so large a proportion of animal matter shows that the event was, geologically, comparatively recent. The fact that animals of all ages were involved in the catastrophe shows it to have been sudden. End of the quote. Now, here's the thing. I forgot to mention that the Zetas, in the opinion of the Zetas, were going to have 500 to 600 foot tidal sloshing during the hour of the coming pole shift. There are whales of beluga whales found 500 feet up along the St. Lawrence Seaway. Up 500 feet. Now, Velikovsky says, well, the beluga whale was not known to climb mountains. There you are. The mammoth, another 3,600-year signature, is the passing of the woolly mammoth, which is estimated to have died out in two spasms, 7,400 and 3,700. That's pretty much lining up with 3,607 too, huh? Both multiples of 3,600. Quoting GeoCities, Wrangel Islands is 120 miles off the coast of Siberia. Fossil remains of 6-foot-tall, 2-ton woolly mammoths found there have been carbon dated to only 3,700 years ago. The carbon dating of the fossil remains indicate the mammoth lived on Wrangel Island from 7,390 before present. Now, what that means is they got trapped up there on Wrangel Island by one pole shift, and then the next one wiped them out because it was too cold. I mean, these are big elephants. They eat a lot of vegetation. And then nothing like that grows up on Wrangel Island. It's in the Arctic Circle now. Okay. What catastrophe caused them to be isolated on an island and later frozen to death? Sloshing water and heaving and sinking land masses is implied, both of which occurred during crustal shifts. Wrangel Island moved into the Arctic, and these giant herbivores could no longer get vegetation to eat. Quoting Zeta Talk, the mammoth is a species that went extinct during the past few pole shifts, primarily when the grasslands they browsed in Siberia were drawn rapidly into the new polar circle. But were drawn into water and drowned, and then far enough north, the mammoths were flash frozen. And I might add, showing up on Discovery Channel that in that way. Even the eyeballs are fresh. If the mammoth was not fresh frozen, they would be in some sort of state of decay, perhaps the skin preserved, but internal organs a mush. This was not the case, as your recent documentaries on the frozen state of these preserved beasts show. If flash frozen and then frozen steadily since that date, then how did the mammoth get green grass and buttercups in their tummies? A fast trot to the Arctic Circle? Does anyone presume they ate snow? These were herbivores. The grasslands were moved during the pole shift. That's the end of the quote from Zeta Talk. Quoting Velikovsky, who offers even more details. In 1797, the body of a mammoth with flesh, skin, and hair was found in northeastern Siberia. The flesh had the appearance of freshly frozen beef. It was edible, and wolves and sled dogs fed on it without harm. The ground must have been frozen ever since the day of their entombment. Had it not been frozen, the bodies of the mammoths would have putrefied in a single summer. But they remained unspoiled for some thousands of years. In some mammoths, when discovered, even the eyeballs were still preserved. This shows that the cold became suddenly extreme and knew no relenting afterward. In the stomachs and between the teeth of the mammoths were found plants and grasses that do not now grow in northern Siberia, but are now found in southern Siberia. Microscopic examination of the skin showed red blood corpuscles, which was proof not only of a sudden death, but the death was due to suffocation, either by gases or water, more likely water. King Shen, and if the Jewish exodus and the explosion of Thera and the changed climate in the Sahara are not confirmation enough that something momentous happened 3,600 years ago, we have this from the Chinese, written during the reign of the Emperor Qin, 1,600 years ago before Christ. That's that 3,600 year. And I quote, "In the 29th year of Sheng, the sun was dimmed. King Shen lacked virtue. The sun was distressed. During the blast years of Shen, ice formed in mornings and frosts in the 6th month. Heavy rainfall toppled temples and buildings. Heaven gave severe orders. The sun and moon were untimely. Hot and cold weather arrived in disorder. The 5 cereal crops withered and died." End of the quote. With that, I'd like to switch to our current weather, which it sounds a lot like the China report. The Zetas have predicted, in the opinion of the Zetas, that we're going to have the seasons blending into each other. A lot more snow in summer, which is showing up quite a bit. But, summer in January, freezes in July, this kind of thing. And then the wobble, it sounds like it's going to get a lot worse if the sun and moon were untimely. That sounds like slowing and wobbling. Not the first time this has hit the Earth. If that sounds like our current weather worldwide, take that as a warning. Andrea and I are in Wisconsin and are painfully aware of the recent polar vortex. But just look at the opposite side of the globe. Quoting Daily Mail regarding Australia. Roads melted, animals dropped dead, and fires raged as temperature records tumbled across New South Wales, South Australia, and Victoria. The little kangaroos and the little koalas dropping out of trees, and they show pictures of melted tires dripping, cars up on a rack, and the tire is just dripping onto the floor of the garage. Australia heat, the heat in South America too, as the daily Earth wobble has put them into more sunlight. In other words, the Earth wobble has pushed, with a polar push, Siberia away, and that includes us, the whole northern hemisphere, and then it bounces back. Well, South America is getting more sunlight, and so is Europe. They're having an early spring. They're walking around in their T-shirts, have been most of the winter that way, I think. Quoting strange sounds. Hundreds of cows died from heat stress in Argentina in the last few days. This wave of hot temperature has also reached Uruguay, where more than 100,000 chickens have already died. End of the quote. And the big wobble. Extreme heat has been affecting Australia and now southeastern Brazil, and I quote, "Temperatures have spiked above 108 degrees Fahrenheit. Rio's beaches have never been so crowded." Okay. So if we're tipping so that the northern hemisphere is further away from the sun, which, by the way, you can tell. If you go out and measure where the sun is during the day and compare it to where it's supposed to be along the azimuth, you'll get educated real quick. And people don't really do that, and they should. We have one lady in Wisconsin that does that, Mrs. Sakamaki, and she submits her readings every month, and it just ain't the same at all. It's not where it's supposed to be. Could matters get worse for Australia? How about spontaneous combustion in cattle holding pens in the outback? By February 10th, this happened, right at the continent bend point where the Zetas had predicted Australia would flux as India continues to plunge into the Himalayas and the eastern edge of the Great Indo-Australia Plate lifted. Well, either you have New Zealand sticking up in the air, or you have rock going and bending in the middle of Australia, which it does, right under where they had spontaneous combustion. Because stressed rock gets hot. Can't lift that weight, then bend. Stressed rock does overheat. Quoting Zeta Talk, in the opinion of the Zetas in 2010, the eastern part of the Indo-Australia plate will be raised, including New Zealand and eastern Australia. This is heavy lifting. Will the entire two-thirds of Australia be underwater at the hour of the pole shift? If not, any high peak will be so washed over by the ocean in turmoil, rushing into the void, that survival clinging to those mountain peaks will not be feasible. We advise no one to attempt to survive in Western Australia for this reason, and that goes for India. Poor India will be pushed down under the waves, and rather suddenly. You know, they're already having sinking problems, etc. But they take it very seriously. I get a lot of email from India. Where to go? Africa. Go to Africa. Canada is welcoming immigrants. They do. You know, people are looking at those. Because if you stay, you either get in a boat, but you know, swirling water is it can form whirlpools, tip your boat, down you go. A lot of high waves. Raining fish. On February 24th, 63-mile-per-hour winds blew fish out of the water in Malta. Quoting a Strange Sounds article, after record winds in Croatia and unprecedented blizzard in northern Greece, now fish being blown out of the seas in Malta. Is the weather going crazy? End of the quote. Also, on February 23rd to 24th, Greece had snow and high winds, completely burying cars in some places. That's odd. Flights, of course, were canceled in the whiteout. The hurricane conditions in Croatia broke all records. The jet stream. What's causing all these weather anomalies is the Earth wobble, slinging the globe back and forth and side to side daily. An example of how this churning translates to weather is the jet stream over the U.S., which was recently measured at 231 miles per hour, where it normally rides at 184 miles per hour. February saw weather records breaking all over the world. I'm quoting the Big Wobble. This month, Moscow suffered record snowfall. The Atacama Desert in Chile, one of the driest places on Earth, had so much rainfall, a 196-foot waterfall that had run dry for 10 years has been reactivated. Temperatures in Saskatoon dipped as low as minus 44.68 Fahrenheit, breaking a 112-year record. High temperatures of 80 Fahrenheit broke records in parts of central Alabama as the mercury hit 15 degrees Fahrenheit over the average. 6 foot of snow fell in just 24 hours in parts of California, breaking a 100-year record. Temperatures above 108 degrees Fahrenheit are causing overcrowding on Rio beaches as temperatures break a 97-year-old record in Brazil. End of the quote. Well, it's still going on, but it's going to get worse. And that's what I prepared, Andre, and aren't we in that kind of shape today yet?
Yeah, we're sort of dealing with this. Before we went live today, Nancy and I were discussing as we do here in Wisconsin, we discuss the weather because tomorrow it could be 60 degrees, but today it's negative 10 or around there. This polar vortex thing, going back, I've always lived in the upper Midwest and lived in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Chicago, that sort of thing. I've noticed that, over the years, the meteorologists or TV weather people are getting increasingly weird with terms like the new clouds, and polar vortex was a recent term that was created to explain this wobble weather, the strange weather patterns that we're getting recently. And that's like the polar vortex. Okay, it makes sense, but it wasn't a thing like 5-6 years ago. Am I just losing it, or? I sort of keep track of this stuff. Like, I don't remember anybody talking about polar vortex when I was a kid.
No, we never did.
We had cold weather.
We never did when we were young. We had an occasional, well below zero temp. But the whole idea, when you look at the maps, it looks like the Northeast, including Wisconsin, Minnesota, and all the way up through Canada, to the Arctic, is the North Pole. And then here's Alaska. 45 degrees, everyone's out jogging in their T-shirts. It's so clear that there's these warm spikes. Alaska is one, and the whole of Europe, the Netherlands, etc. They're really warm, and then you have these cold spots in between because the Wobble is a push away of the North Pole, and then it lobs to the right, and then lobs to the left, and then it bounces back, as a reaction having been pushed away. Well, when it lobs to the right and left, you also get certain parts of the globe pulled up more toward the equator, and therefore they get more sun. But this can all be measured. I did this measuring of the Wobble, and I did this in 2004 for like 5 or 6 years with a international team that went out and regularly carefully read the azimuth, the altitude, and measured the time, and we compared it against what it was supposed to be. And it was a figure 8. If you are above the North Pole and look down, that's what you see. Well, this way, right, and then on the left, and then back again, and you can see it. So it's probably going to get worse. It can get into weird reverberations. You can have the North Pole suddenly flip toward the sun, which the Zetas call in opposition. Rarely happens, but I'd like that about now, melt all our snow. And so magnets do funny things when they're in free space, and they can wobble and twist. Our globe is trying to align with the sun, which is its dominant magnet, and here comes Nibiru, which is like a T shape. It's pointing its North Pole almost straight outward rather than aligning with the sun for whatever reason. And so we get a magnetic blast. And boy, does it show up. Our Schumann Resonance, it goes white hot, for hours at a time. And all the other Batsaris readings, just crazy. And meanwhile, people lose their electricity, or they have outages. Planes suffer. Even the stealth plane had to suddenly land because it lost all its electrical system. And I think because of its wings, it could glide, but they knew enough to, point for the nearest flat place. And they didn't say it was needing repair later. And they just took it back up later. Smoking planes, and plenty of that, because the EMP is, if anybody has a situation where they have old wiring in their house, they can get things smoking, or they can smell burning wires because the current electricity is too high-powered for the old wires. Well, you get EMP. It's not just all of a sudden whammy, knocking all the trips out, and all the breakers. What happens is sometimes you get smoking wires. So recently, this last month or so, we've had planes repeatedly all over the world saying had to land because people were turning green. Some horrible smell was filling the cabin, and we don't know what it was. And they never come back and tell you what it was. They just wait a while, and then they take it back up. So this is from melting wires, and getting in the ventilation system. And you can also have your electronics just knocked out. Either the breakers flip, if you're lucky, or it fries the filament. That happened to me. We had EMP here. My friends in Baraboo said, oh, the TV in the guest room turned itself on. That was the week, and I lost my water heater, the filament. All 5 lights in the basement were burned out, the filaments. Both the plumber, the electrician, everybody who came said, yep, you had a pulse. So there we are. And when New York City glowed light blue and blew a transformer, they said, well, a transformer blew, that's what caused that bright spot on the horizon. Well, fine, but what about the light blue skies everywhere, right? And that was the same day that Direct Link, I think it is, that supplies so much of communications in the U.S., it was out. They had an outage at their Louisiana headquarters, which practically sits in water. They're right on a swamp. What fools. So they have all their servers sitting there with the water table like 2 inches below, I guess. I took pictures of, and showed how there's their parking lot and there's the swamp, and is there any difference more than six inches between the tires? And so, and you have the water table that close, you're begging for EMP, you're enticing it. So they had all kinds of transformers that blew in that area at that day, and knocked out everything in, the U.S. So the neon clouds are coming lower. The EMP is striking more often. Then we have the Lomonosov explosion. Lomonosov explosions. Russian satellite took pictures of what they were viewing on where the upper atmosphere, touches space, basically, way up there. And they looked like little atom bombs going off, very orange, very big, with a mushroom cloud. And from that mushroom cloud out would be this circle, all in orange, expanding out. And there was like 3 or 4 of them that were visible kind of side by side. And it was like, nobody knows what this is. Never been seen before. Well, it wasn't 2 days later that my favorite Nibiru photographer, Alberto, in Italy, old man in his 80s, been at this 20, 25 years, he looks up at the sky. He filters 4 light in the red spectrum. He uses mylar or various filters that allow more red light to come in than any other spectrum. And therefore, he gets Nibiru and its moon swirls. He gets so much detail. And then he does zoom. He's gotten the surface of Nibiru, which is cream-colored clouds. That astonished me. And also magnetic fields that form around some of these moon swirls, temporary little magnetic fields, because it's all charged stuff. So what he was getting was something that looked like jello with light orbs floating in it. And he said, what is this? And I said, I wonder if you in Italy are looking through the upper atmosphere and are finding those explosions, and those light blobs in the jello are the explosions. So then he did a zoom of the sun, and here he's got chunks of maroon, like somebody's spit, floating around. I said, what is that? It's not lit stuff. It's maroon colored, and then I asked the Zetas, and they said, oh, that's the grease in the tail of Nibiru, which we've talked about since the beginning of Zeta Talk, coming down, and when it hits the upper atmosphere, it has oxygen, and therefore it can ignite, the grease can, and that's the Lomonosov explosions. So now we have this stuff coming closer, more grease, more EMP, more grief, and they keep warning that we're not, in the opinion of the Zetas, that we're not going to have satellite service that good or that long. And people were going to have to shrink down to using landlines. Forget the Wi-Fi. It can be interfered with. It can come and go. So it's a lot of adjustments for mankind. We're so used to our technology. We rely so much on our satellites, on our electrical systems operating without interference. And we don't necessarily have to go all the way back to caveman days and hunker down around the fire, although we may get there, because you can use shortwave radio with a crank wind-up radio. And if we've got enough towers here and there, we'll talk to each other. You might not be able to talk to Europe, but there are things that can be done, and things that will most likely prove to be, remember when? Those days were the good days. Video games, TV, streaming movies. I don't know.
The good days?
The good day. Well,
it depends on your perspective, I guess.
Yeah.
It's an interesting segue there too, Nancy, with the current state of our internet and news sources. We tend to think that we have instant access to all this information, which we do to an extent, but it also, it's filtered and censored and massaged, the information that we ultimately do get. I know that YouTube and Facebook and Twitter are doing some purging of accounts recently over the past couple weeks, and they've been doing it for a while. unsubscribing people off of YouTube accounts and shadow banning and that sort of thing has been going on for a while, but it seems to be getting a little bit more ramped up in the past couple of days, weeks, that YouTube is especially going after, quote unquote, I'm using air quotes, conspiracy theory videos, and I heard yesterday or the day before that they're also going after sex trafficking and pedophilia type conspiracy videos and or that sort of thing on YouTube. So my point here would be, first of all, know a good source to get your information. If you've got something that you use, whether it's on the internet or newspaper, radio, what have you, take it with a grain of salt. Always do your own research because it all can be clouded or censored or, faked. So I think in the next, as the poles shift and these sociological changes get ramped up as we're going forward, I think we're going to see a lot more lack of information or the hiding of information. And
we do already. They just don't. They don't report it. That happens with bolides screaming in. At first we heard it, and then it was space junk, don't worry. And then you just don't get the news. Unless you have maybe local and it screams overhead, you just don't get the news. So true. I wanted to also mention there's a big earthquake in Ecuador, and then right away down the spine of the Andes, down in Peru too. That was picking up. There was something that was predicted by the Zetas for the 7 of 10 plate movements, and this is picking up. And the New Madrid moan, which I feature in this week's newsletter, they heard in Illinois and some places along the New Madrid in northern, Louisville, Kentucky, and what was the other place? Chicago, in Justice, near Chicago. And where the earth makes horrible moaning noises because it's being stressed. Well, that's all on the New Madrid. And in Chicago, where it was heard, it's along the canal, and the Zetas warned there we could have that rip open, so that the water will sluice through under Chicago in those canals, because they fixed it so that it would drain sewage toward the Mississippi years ago, and those canals are still under Chicago and can break and let the waters of Lake Michigan flow rapidly. And they say it because water scours everything around it, that Chicago could find the worst horrors happening when the New Madrid hits. And same thing with Springfield, Illinois, right on the New Madrid. So if you get that kind of rock stress happening, you're going to have quakes following, and the New Madrid is getting closer. Read up about it, because it's and remember, you need to be, if your house is made out of brick and the like, you need to get out. You're better off sleeping outside, because summer's coming in a tent.
Yeah, I hope.
If you have any doubts, any doubts. We've heard the moaning here in Wisconsin, Andre. When we had the booms coming through from Clintonville, blah, 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 they ended up in Baraboo.
Yeah.
Well, my son has said at least twice in the middle of the night, he said, my God, someone's out there singing and wailing. And my friends in Baraboo said they have a dog, and they said the dog was completely frantic, panting and whining and trying to hide under the bed. Well, that's what happens. They're telling you that the electronic screech coming from the distressed rock is, we need to flee because there's going to be an earthquake. So on that happy note, just to say, things are going to get worse, not better.
Right. And the best way to deal with a lot of these situations is to be prepared. And first of all, the preparedness of having the information of what's going on, A, and B, having the knowledge to be able to deal with it. If you see some inclement weather or pole shift coming to your area, and hopefully you're at your safe location already. That's why it's called preparedness. That you're already in the process of taking care of an upcoming situation. So that's why we stressed all of the basic information of what's going on, like this episode of the 3600-year signature, but also we try to put out there that it is survivable. And a lot of our videos cover the survival techniques, you can also access that at usaebn.org, and or Zeta Talk also has a survival section as well.
Oh yeah, yeah. Some of and one that I'm very proud of is where we talked about how you can get all your vitamins and minerals from bugs and weeds. I kid you not. You know, your kid has scurvy. Well, why aren't they eating the weeds along the roadside? That's how common vitamin C in weeds is. You know, you don't all the vitamin deficiencies. It's right there waiting for you. So. Yeah, and you don't need meat. You can mix amaranth and corn together and get the equivalent of red meat. If you keep chickens, they run around, eat the bugs, then you get the eggs and you get the chicken, you know. Now, this is not something that you can just say, oh, I bought a bunch of chicks, I'm all set. Oh, no. You have to learn how to shelter them so they can roost at night and not be eaten by fox and whatever, you know, and you have to learn how to identify your best brooders and make sure, you know, that they get what they need. Baby chicks need water. Roosters are necessary because they're, well, for obvious reasons, but they also protect the flock, you know, taking on hawks or whatever. And if they're not tame, you got to watch yourself around roosters.